my name is Alistair Lynn. I'm a freelance software developer. Been working in Python for about 15 years. I do Django and front end if you need it. If you need someone to build something, come hire me. So I'm going to talk to you today a bit about exceptions. It's a bit of an origin story here. Does anyone know what this function does? Does anyone know the struct library? Hands up, who's used this? Nobody? Very few hands. Okay. Struct is part of the Python standard library. It's a library which you can use to convert between binary and Python formats. So if you've got an integer, you put it into struct.pack, you'll get out like the binary representation of it. Or vice versa using struct.unpack. And I had a bit of a problem with struct.pack a few years ago. I had at work a process which ran in the background once a day on a massive load of database rows. And I called something like this. Struct.pack with some arguments, some numbers in. What that should be doing is packing these into a binary format, which I'm using for something else. And what it told me, or rather what I heard secondhand through Sentry, was error. Short format requires minus 32768 spelled really weirdly, is less than number, is less than this. And this was a problem because I can't debug this. It just says one of those is wrong, but which one? Like, which one of those is wrong? What is the number that I'm passing in? With some more context, like, which row of these, like, 5 million database rows is this error coming from? Now, I'm being slightly unfair to struct here. Like, it's not a bad error message, but with all the context available, with what I was needing to do, this fundamentally does not tell me enough, did not tell me enough to be able to fix the problem. I had to go and do a whole bunch of digging. I couldn't rerun this locally. I had to go do a whole bunch of digging because I was not being told the information I needed to know. And that is fundamentally the thing about errors. They're not just there for fun. Errors need to be able to give information to people, to be able to enable them to be able to do something about them. I'm going to run this error by you. Has anyone seen this happen to them before? Hands raised if you've seen this. Okay, a couple of hands. Cool. Any shout outs for what is the problem here? What's actually gone on? Shout out if you recognize what this might be. Correct. This is a DNS issue. What's happening here is that we're trying to look up a domain and the domain isn't there. Things to note. Nowhere in this error message does it say DNS. We don't see the word domain. We don't see resolve. Somebody coming across this for the first time sees GI error erno 8. What does that mean? What does that mean? Node name nor serve name provided. What do those means? Or not known. Mysterious. This tells you absolutely nothing. It shows some little implementation details. It turns out GAI stands for get adder info, which is like a Linux syscall used to talk to the system resolver. This does not tell you what you need to know, which is that DNS is failing. Here's another example. So we've got a class here with one method on it. Call it with an argument, and it prints it out. Pretty simple, dummy example. But then when we try and actually call it, we get this error message out. Do a thing is missing one required positional argument, arg. But hang on, we are passing it. Like right there, we're passing it. What's going on here? Any guesses as to what the problem here is? Sorry? Yes. Why is self missing? Yep, correct. So X here is pointing at the class example, not an instance of it. It's pointing at the class itself. Is that obvious from this message? Well, if you've done Python for a very long time, yeah, probably. But if you're coming to it fresh, this is really not obvious at all. So one thing I do is I teach young people, 16 to 18-year-olds, a bit of Python in the context of a robotics competition. They build a robot, program it in Python to be autonomous, and then compete with it. And one of the things this robot can do is it has a camera, it can look around and see markers around the arena they're competing in. And every year, at least one team will make this mistake. If marker ID equals 3 or 4, do something, otherwise do something else. Right, what they're meaning there is, if it's 3 or if it's 4, I want to do one thing, otherwise I want to do something else. This is not telling them anything at all. It's doing the wrong thing, and it's giving the worst kind of error, which is no error at all. Just silently do something different from what the user intended. Is that what they've written? Well, no, but is that what they intended? Well, clearly, yes. The intention there is quite clear. This doesn't just apply to code, of course. More people than just developers see error messages. This is a pretty famous one, error message on a printer which says PC load letter. What in the name of God does that actually mean? This is completely useless to the average person who sees this. What does PC load letter mean? Well, in fact, it's potentially even just misleading, right? To the average person with a printer, if they see the words PC, the letters PC, they probably think personal computer. In this case, it actually stands for, I think, print cartridge, right? This is not only bad, it's actually actively misleading. If we go to extreme examples, and you'll forgive me for citing the Bird website here. This person has seen some kernel panic and is completely freaking out about it because it says the phrase kill process or sacrifice child. Now, I think this is quite funny, but at the same time, like, this is on someone's TV. This person, whatever else we might guess or know about them, does not have a computer science degree. The word child means the same thing to 99% of the population. And the phrase sacrifice child means the same to 99% of the population. Now, I probably wouldn't assume that my machine's been possessed by a demon, depending on the type of demon. But this is still completely useless. And this person, however rational we may think they are, is clearly quite distressed about this, right? And so this is the first point I want to make. Interfaces are designed. When we build a bit of software, when we build a package, a module, a library, service, whatever, right, it will have some interface, some way that people use it. There might be other developers, might be end users. It has some boundary. That is the thing which is designed. Even if we're just designing it by accident, we're still designing it, and we do have to own it, right? And that comes with all the constraints that apply to a normal design problem. There is a design language, there's all the pragmatics around it. And errors are part of that interface. If you error in a particular way, that is part of the interface you're presenting. That's part of your design. And if you error badly, you have a bad design, right? These things are visible. Errors will happen. You can't prevent errors entirely. They will happen in practice. That's why we write the exceptions being raised, right? And so someone's going to see them. And we need to do a bit better. So what actually is in a useful error message? Well, we need to convey information. What information do we need to convey? Well, here's what I reckon are the key 4 points. What is it that actually happened here? What's the important context around what happened? Why do we care? Why is it a problem that this happened? And what can we do about it? So I'll give you an example. To go back to the earlier example, this DNS error. no node name nor server name provided or not known. So what happened here? We tried to do a DNS lookup, it failed. We tried to look up a domain name, that didn't work. What's the context? We're looking up api.stripe.com. Why is this a problem? Because we now can't process payments. We're losing money because we can't talk to Stripe. That is much more that's much more urgent, useful information than just GI error. Steps to resolution. Look at the DNS resolver. Something's wrong with the DNS resolver. Maybe check on Stripe status. What would a better error message look like for this? I reckon it might look something like this. Error for payments. Lookup failed for api.stripe.com. Check the DNS resolver. Is this perfect? No, absolutely not. There's always ways that you can improve this. But does that give you much more of the useful information than the error message at the top? I think it does. I'm going to pick on another example. This one from practical experience. This one happened to me about a week and a half ago. Junior engineer came onto the project that I'm working on and had this appear when he was setting up. He had no idea how to debug it, and frankly, I don't blame him, because that says absolutely nothing at all. What should this have been presented? What should this presented? Well, what happened? We tried to run a sub-process, but the program isn't there. When we tried to run the sub-process, the program itself was missing. There we've already got a whole bunch more information. What was the context? It's a program called ffprobe, which is part of ffmpeg. That's the thing that's missing. That's the context. Why is this a problem? Because what we're trying to do is extract some metadata from videos that are being uploaded. Right? You cannot do that unless you have FFmpeg. Steps of resolution. Install it. It was missing. It had been missed from the setup guide, he says in deliberate passive voice, it was later added. However, this would have been a much more useful error message. Config error, problem with the configuration. Can't find ffprobe to extract video metadata. Have you run brew install ffmpeg? What happened? Context. Why it's a problem? What to do about it? Again, is this perfect? No, absolutely not. Is it better? I think it is. One thing to bear in mind here, though, of course, is who actually is your audience? Like, these things are being consumed by humans. Who are these humans? Developers? Including you? Well, quite probably. But that's not enough. You can't just say this is good for developers, because who are the developers? Like, what is their experience? What level are they at? What have they worked with before? If I'm writing an API which expects a list, and I'm given a tuple, and I can't deal with that, right? I might say, this must be a list this must be a tuple expected list, or whichever way around it is. That's enough information for a senior Python dev, right? If you're expecting this to be consumed by people who don't know Python very well, maybe you want to add a bit more information. Maybe you want to say how you convert between the two, like a quick link to a documentation or just a one-liner which says you can call list on something to convert it into a list. Is that useful for a senior dev? No. So it really depends on who you expect to be consuming the API. But of course, there may be other developers involved. So quite often, if you've ever used something like GraphQL, if you raise an error in Python in something that's implementing a GraphQL API, it will happily just pass the message you put into it straight into a front end. And now, you've got a JavaScript developer looking at a message which says, I wanted a list, but you gave me a tuple. Is that useful to them? No, not remotely. Like, those are not two different concepts in JavaScript. That's completely useless to a JavaScript developer. So the same message can be differently useful to different people. You have to understand who you are presenting to and when they're presenting it. Because what I want to do with information, if something's failing when I'm getting a new project set up in dev, is different to some changes have gone in and my regression tests are now failing, right? Those are different things, and I want different information in those cases. That's different to something's failing in production, right? Failing in production, I might not be able to replicate it locally. I want a whole bunch more context. That context might not be useful if I'm running locally where I can just attach a debugger. So these are context sensitive. But it's also not just developers. There may be end users. End users see errors, and they see them all the time, and often those errors are very, very bad. There are many, many times when you will see on a website, sorry, something went wrong. Like a classic one, and this really weirds me out, is to like put up a modal dialogue which just said, an error occurred, and a button labeled OK. Like, it's not OK. Something's broken. Like, when the buttons are labeled, well, shit, right? This is not useful. It doesn't tell the person anything they can do anything with. Another classic one is it says, something went wrong. Please try again later. So I'm a British guy, but I live in the Netherlands. Quite often, when I'm trying to use services, they will get very confused about this fact. Well, this doesn't look like a British postcode. It's got the wrong number of letters in it. But this will just manifest as an error which says, please try again later. Well, like, later after what? Like, after I've moved country? Later after you fixed the bug? That does not give me anything I can do anything with. Another one, which is classic, is to say something went wrong. Please contact support. Well, firstly, if you're showing that to literally everyone when a service goes down, I suspect the support folks are not going to be very happy with you. Like, if they're getting 10,000 people at the same time, contacting them saying, the thing is down, that's a bad day for them. But also, even if you do want them to contact support, like, how? Like, we just say, please contact, like, look them up in the phone book. Like, give people an email address, give people something they can do something with, give them a phone number, give them a form. And then when they do contact support, what does support do? Well, they're another group of users, right? If you've got a support team, they want to do something completely different with this information. If they get some upset customer sending a screenshot which says, something went wrong, please try again later, contact support. Well, what can they do about it, right? They want to be able to look up solutions in some kind of knowledge base. You can't search a knowledge base for the phrase an error occurred, because that can mean literally anything. So for them, they might want something like error codes, different codes for different things, which have a meaning that they can look up in some wiki. It is different for different people what's useful in an error. Keep in mind all the people, even the indirect ones, who are going to be seeing it. Another point I want to make, be anti-fragile. If an error has happened once, probably going to happen again. If an error has made somebody confused once, probably going to make them confused again. So if some error has come up which has confused you, don't be happy with just fixing the one bug or the whatever. Go and improve the error. If you had to go on a fishing expedition to go and find some bit of key context which was missing, go and change the error to include the context next time. If the message was confusing about what you're supposed to do, improve the message. These things can get better if you just, every time something bad happens, make it a bit less fragile. Here's another one. Don't make developers play whack-a-mole. So, quick example here. So imagine you've written a service which goes and scrapes some point of interests out of Google Maps. We're picking out something which looks for all the pubs near the Radisson Blu in Dublin to rank them or something. And your code has broken on some unexpected bit of data for one of the entries. And after 5 minutes it fails and goes value error, unexpected, blah, 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 blah. Annoyed developer goes, okay, go and fix that, find what it was, fix it, run this thing again. 5 minutes later, that one succeeds, but then the very next pub that it finds breaks in a slightly different way. Okay, so you go and fix that, run it again. Both of those succeed. Then another one fails in a slightly different way. That's annoying when it's running on a cycle. If it's something that runs once a day and you're trying to fix it in production, this is unbelievably frustrating, but all the information was already there, right? The design of an error is a part of the interface. That is a design, that is a choice. Even if it's something when we've made by accident, it's a choice. We could have told the developer all this stuff up front. We could have run through all of them, captured all of the errors and delivered them in one go, but we didn't. And we really should have. And that I really would urge you to do. If you're processing anything in a collection where you expect some kind of error, catch all the errors and raise them all in one go. Don't make the developer go, fix this one, fix this one, fix this one. Use your own errors to clarify context. So in this slightly contrived example, I've got a function called getFooConfig. Get the config for foo, it's part of my API. And the way it actually works internally is it looks something up, but that really doesn't matter to somebody using this thing, right? But if it's misconfigured, they'll get some traceback, which has some levels of things. The actual problem is the foo isn't configured here. So there's a key missing from a dictionary. But we're then calling into something else. This is an implementation detail that somebody doesn't care about. We're just telling them a key error. This isn't useful, it's not actionable, it doesn't tell them where the problem occurred. If the problem is the foo isn't configured, tell them so, right? Catch the error and convert it into your own error, which clarifies the context. If somebody gets an error message that says foo is not configured, what they'll take away from it isn't something's broken, it's foo is not configured. Right? We can improve on this in a few ways. I'm not going to explain this one in detail, but if we do this, then it'll include the key error context as well. But we really don't care about that. Giving people clear information is partly about what you don't show them about as well as what you do. Don't give people irrelevant information. So we can hide that bit of the traceback by just saying this, and then you'll really just get a traceback which says, get fooconfig failed because foo is not configured. Can we improve this further? Yeah, maybe. All this isn't doing is giving something a resolution, right? So maybe something like this. Foo is not configured. Have you run this thing that will configure it? Right? Now that's immediate actionable. Now we're making the person who's receiving it do even less work because what they need to do about it is clear. We're giving them the information they need to take action. Now I can give you a whole bunch of extra tips you can do to make errors better. Chained exceptions, you can do raise from E. I'm not going to go into detail about explaining this, but that lets you explicitly say this error caused this one and give developers much more context about how to understand these things. Own the traceback is a more general case of this. The traceback that comes out with an error message is part of the information you're giving somebody when they see that message, right? Own it. if something is nested ridiculously deep and you can't figure out what's going on, figure out a way to present that better. Use your own error subclasses. Don't just like raise a value error. Useful for you to be able to catch specific things, can make things a bit more clear. Parameterize your tests. This is a case of the whack-a-mole thing. If your test is testing 15 things in a row, it's just going to fail, and they're all broken. The test is just going to fail at the first one. So if it goes and fixes that, then it's going to pass, but then fail at the second one. If you're going to test 15 different things, make them 50 different unit tests. That way you're giving people the information they need in one go. These are all failing, and these are the ways that they're all failing. Fuzzy name matches can be really good. Not just there is no such property foo, but there is no such property foo, but there is this other property boo, which is very close to it in name. Maybe you meant, did you mean X, right? Being able to give some people suggestions about what they might have meant is giving them much more information. Highlight source locations. This is something that's really improving in Python. If you can say, not just in that original example with struct.pack, something went wrong, but it's this value, with a little squiggly underline pointing at the variable name. It had this value. You're giving people more information. Macros are a cautionary tale. I just want to chuck this one in there. Has anyone here ever worked in C++? Okay, a couple of you. Templates, lol. So parsing C++, you may or may know, is not only NP hard, it's actually undecidable in general. And when you do something right, it can be quite good, it can be quite fast. Get one character wrong in C++, you will get impenetrable, like 20 pages of spaghetti out of the compiler. But that's not because the compiler authors don't want to give you good messages, it's that they can't. The whole system has become so complex with all these macro expansions and template expansions that it's basically impossible to be able to figure out what it should have been. If you're going to be clever with things, with reflection, with macros, even like Rust's good macros, be very, very, very deliberate about how the error paths are going to work there as well as the normal paths, because this so easily leads to spaghetti errors. 20 years ago, the way that people wrote compilers, like parsers, was with things like Lex and Yak and Antler, where you just describe the grammar into a code generator and it would spit you out a thing that parses it, which is fine until somebody types in a syntax error and you'll just get completely impenetrable error, like unexpected token X, expected dunder, whatever. This is one of the reasons that Python changed its parser a few years ago to something handwritten, right? Because handwritten parsers may not improve the quality of what you get out in the happy path, but you can get much, much, much better error messages. You can actually explain to people what went wrong. But if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's that these are all just a handful of tips. They're things for the toolbox, but what makes good errors isn't really an exercise in applying tips or tricks, and it's not necessarily an exercise in just discipline or develop a skill. It's really an exercise in empathy. When an error message pops up, it's not being understood, consumed, whatever, by a machine, right? The person taking this in is a person, a human being who may be quite stressed, right? When something has clearly gone wrong, this person wants to put it right. Something has gone wrong for these people, and if we're not giving them the tools they need to fix it, that's just not very kind. That person may be you in a few months, and I think it's worth being a bit kinder with how we do errors. Thank you very much. I'll take any question.
Regarding that error with foo is not configured and that with ffmpeg, don't you think that this error may be more misleading if your interpretation of what's wrong is wrong?
So this is, we guessed that the problem is that this thing is installed. We might have guessed wrong. It might be that the path's misconfigured or something. And then, yeah, that's a fair point. To an extent, none of these options are ever going to be perfect. Producing better error messages is sort of a harm reduction thing. If you can make things less bad, on average, it's an improvement. Even if there are potentially cases where you're making things worse. Like if you produce no errors at all, you just said error in every case, it is absolutely true that you wouldn't mislead people about the cause in any of these cases, but I don't think that would be an overall net improvement. So yeah, it's absolutely true that in some cases we might take people down the garden path, and that sucks, but that's not necessarily a reason to not do it.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question here. If you've got other questions, please do put your hand up so I can see you, and then I'll get around to you in a second or so for that.
Hello, lovely talk, by the way. Do you have any thoughts about the extra documentation burden from having properly good semantic error messages, and how you manage and maintain the complexity from having to also now maintain your semantic errors?
I think you can get some of the way with this by making sure that test coverage covers the tests. So like if you're being explicit that the way you present an error is part of your interface, then covering it by tests makes sense. Like if this is presenting the wrong error or a misleading error, that is broken in some way. So tests help there. It is true that it is more burden to write a descriptive long error message than it is to just write raise value error, right? That is absolutely true. To an extent, it depends what you think of the trade-off in productivity is here between whether that extra burden and making sure to manage it with your checklists and PRs and whatever, it is worth the better experience for someone who actually takes these things. Personally, I've never regretted putting the time into this stuff right. But I am just one person, your mileage may absolutely vary. I think it's worth it and processes can be put in place, especially with tests, but your mileage may absolutely vary.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We've got a question over here, but we've got one just at the back beforehand. Thank you.
I would like to go back to the question that a colleague here asked.
Sure.
About the value of what you propose as like a resolution to an error in the error message. Mm-hmm. And I think the key question to ask if you are writing an error message is who is your audience, just like you said in your presentation. And for me, the main thing I look at is, am I writing a library or an application? Because, for example, if I am writing a library and I expect other developers to use it, I would rather not hide a traceback, because maybe the bug is in my implementation and then they can see it because they have access to the traceback. But on the other hand, if you're writing an application, then a suggestion like brew, install, whatever is very helpful. But there are like two different use cases in my opinion. And sorry, it's not a question, it's just a remark.
Yeah, I understand your point. I think to a degree, it's not necessarily that there's one right answer here. It's not that you should always hide tracebacks. It's not that you should always expose them. It's that it pays to be deliberate in your choice of presentation when these things occur. You may come to different tech decisions than I do about what information is useful to a user, whoever that may be, but that's fine. The point isn't really do things present the same set of information that I suggest might be a good idea. The point is be deliberate about it and be considerate about what is useful and what isn't useful in your opinion and in your experience to the people that like to consume it. And yes, it's absolutely true that things good for an application may be different from a library. You have to be, these things are context dependent, yeah.
That's great. We've got time probably for one, possibly two more questions after this one here.
Do you think Python will ever have error messages as good as Rust? And was your reference to macros in Rust the only reference to Rust in this talk?
I was going to go into a bit more detail about the Rust's approach in the compiler to its error messages. Unfortunately, I had to cut that a bit for time. Didn't really feel like it was best to spend time covering that rather than Python at a Python conference. But yes, Rust and really its forebear Clang in this space did spend an awful lot of time putting in time into making good compiler diagnostics, really focusing on things like tracking source locations. Like this is the cause of this is the cause of this. What other information might be useful to somebody who sees this? So including contextual clues like that is part of good error messages, I think. Give people the information they need. This is the cause of this is much better than just saying this happened, but you have to go and figure out the cause yourself. That's something that Clang and Rust C did much better than things like GCC did before them.